The LSAT has changed yet again. And if you're studying for the LSAT in August or beyond, there is a real chance you're studying the wrong way right now and you have no idea. Of course, the material hasn't changed, but what you're doing might have to change because the actual prep you're doing, the screen you've been practicing on, might not match the screen you sit down to on test day. And that gap will cost you time on the one part of this test where time hurts you the most. Now, this is one of a series of changes over the past several years, by the way. Logic games, of course, are off the LSAT. Then in January, LSAC dropped the comparative reading comp section for some test takers without warning. They didn't even bother to announce it. And now, starting in August, there are two more changes landing at the exact same time. Number one, the LSAT is moving back to being in person for almost everybody. And number two, the entire LSAT interface is getting a redesign. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005. I personally raised my own LSAT score up from a 152 to a 175. And so I've seen LSAC change the exam again and again, and I know exactly what trips people up. And so today I'm going to share with you the upcoming changes and how you should adjust your prep accordingly. So again, two big changes starting in August affecting everybody going forward. The first is where you are taking the LSAT. Starting in August, almost everybody is taking the LSAT in person at a Prometric testing center. That remote at-home option that most people have leaned on for the past several years, ever since the pandemic, is going away for the vast majority of test takers. There are a couple of exceptions, though, and I'll get to who exactly qualifies, but for most people taking the LSAT coming up, the at-home era is over. The second big change is the screen. LSAT is moving to a new testing interface. The user experience is going to change. Where you click around is getting redesigned. There are going to be new buttons for taking it, new layout, a different feel. Now, of course, the content of the LSAT is not changing. It's the same format, same scoring, the same skills that have been part of the LSAT for decades. Logical reasoning is still logical reasoning. Reading comp is still reading comp, for better or worse. What's changing is how you take the LSAT, where you will be, and the design of the screen. That is it. LSEC has been clear and upfront about this, even if not all the changes are welcome ones. Now, even if the LSAT content is the same, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything, right? It means that you have to change how you study, not what you study. But the room where you take it matters more than most people think. So does the software. And there is one change buried in the fine print that will separate those who prepared from those who just showed up and got surprised. Let's start with the move back to taking it in person, because that's the big change, getting all the headlines, and there's a reason behind why that's happening. The official version of this is simple. Starting in August 2026, almost everybody takes the LSAT, the multiple choice portion, that is in person at a Prometric testing center. Prometric is a company LSAC partners with, and there are hundreds of their locations across all 50 states as well as overseas. And these are not borrowed spaces in a random classroom at a university or a high school or a hotel ballroom like in the past. These are dedicated digital testing centers. They are built and staffed to run tests like the LSAT and other exams as well. And so if something goes wrong, which will happen to somebody somewhere inevitably, there is actual staff on site to fix it. Under the previous remote setup, you're left alone with a chat window and a prayer. So why is this happening? LSAC's stated reason is test security. They're not joking about that. That's not jargon. There have been reports of organized cheating services, some of them international, that figured out how to exploit weak spots in remote testing to help people cheat. And of course, there is real money in this, because a strong LSAT score is worth tens of thousands of dollars in getting into better law schools, which will change your whole career. And so that demand led to a supply. Because, I mean, think about it, right? When you let somebody take a high-stakes exam alone from home, a webcam only sees one angle. It doesn't see whatever else might be going on. Can't prevent proxy test takers necessarily, or the capture of unreleased LSAT content. And so it became an arms race between the proctoring software and those trying to cheat on the exam. And which, of course, affects other people negatively, those who are not cheating, because law school admissions is a zero-sum contest. The LSAT is meant to compare you against other applicants. And so even if a thin slice of the scores at the top are fake, the whole ladder bends and breaks, and the honest person who grinds for 6 months to get a legit 172 is fighting against those who cheated. So when LSAC says this is about integrity, I believe this. I mean, they want to protect the honest people who are watching this right now. Moving back in person doesn't make cheating impossible, of course, nothing will, but it will make it a lot harder to do it. If you're taking the LSAT in person at a staffed testing center with proctors in the room and vetted equipment, it's a lot harder to game the LSAT. Now, remote LSAT test takers were only about 40% of everybody taking the LSAT, but they were also the majority of those who had their scores held when LSAC freezes the score because something looked off and they wanted to verify before they released it. So in other words, a minority of test takers were generating most of the integrity problems. If you lay it out like that, it's not that LSAC's doing changes just to be difficult. They are looking at the real consequences of the previous format. Also, if they staff the testing center and have you take it in person, there are fewer technical issues, fewer proctoring issues, fewer interrupted tests. And so I think this change is good for you, all else being equal in the majority of cases. Of course, if you don't have a good at-home environment, it's beneficial for that as well. You just got to be able to commute to an in-person testing center. Now, let's talk about who still gets to take the LSAT remotely, because there are exceptions. It's on a limited case-by-case basis. If you qualify for medical or disability-related accommodations, if you have extreme hardship getting to a testing center, meaning that you're living very far away from the nearest one. Now, once you register for a specific LSAT date, you apply for the exception and submit your documentation through your lsac.org account. These requests take time. They take weeks, not just a couple of days. And so you apply for this the second you register. Don't wait till the week before the test. Now, there is another policy change as well going along with all of this. LSAC has changed how scheduling works. It used to be you register for the LSAT, then scramble for a good slot later. Now you get assigned a scheduling window based on the order in which you registered for the LSAT. It's basically first come, first served. And they literally described it as first to register, first to schedule. In other words, the earlier you register for a given LSAT testing date, the earlier your window opens, meaning you get a better shot at a testing center near you and finding a time that actually works for you. So you want to register early. LSAC says they're still adding more testing centers and appointments, which is great, but of course, the good seats at the more convenient testing locations will still fill up sooner, and those who register first get to pick first. So that's the in-person change. Now, taking the LSAT in person is a pretty significant difference, because if you're studying for the LSAT at home, you're taking your practice tests at home, and you're in your usual spot, your usual chair, your usual desk, the room's quiet, you've done 20 practice tests in that environment, and you're scoring great, but then testing day comes, you've got to go somewhere you've never been to before, in a part of town you had to map out the night before, in an unfamiliar chair, workstation with strangers all around. It could throw you for a loop, and that could lead you to a score drop. The typical student score drops at least 5 to 8 points from their practice test to the actual because of a nerves, anxiety, bad proctor, tech issues. And so the unfamiliar environment could be part of that drop, which means that you don't want to take your practice tests all in that cozy home setup. Starting today, I want you to deliberately put yourself somewhere a little bit worse than ideal. Maybe a library, a coffee shop with background noise you can't control, a desk that's not yours around people who move and cough and shuffle, because you want to train your focus to survive contact with the real world, because that's where you're going to take the actual thing. And you want to simulate test day with that in mind. You're also not taking breaks whenever you want, not having snacks whenever you want, not checking your phone in the middle of the test. This is the exams and endurance piece of how I teach this test. And it's the part that everybody underweights because it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel like studying, but it is studying. Endurance is a skill, and you build it the same way you build everything else by putting in the reps. Now, you want to also know what test day at a testing center is actually like, because the unknown is part of what makes people nervous. You show up at your assigned time and you go through check-in. You present a valid government-issued photo ID. The name on it has to match the name on your LSAT registration, so check that out today. Make sure it lines up. They're going to store your belongings for you in a locker. You're not going to keep your phone with you throughout the exam. You'll go through a security process before you sit down, which is to be expected, right? They want to check that you don't have anything on you, right? The test is going to be digital on a computer, a desktop computer, not a tablet, not an iPad, not a phone. It's going to be on a desktop computer, so be ready for that kind of keyboard, that kind of monitor as well. They're going to provide the scratch paper as well. Now, people forget that The staffed testing center is actually lower risk than your home, because at home, if the internet drops, that's your problem. If your computer overheats, that's your problem. If you have trouble installing the testing software, that's your issue as well. If you have a roommate, a significant other, family interrupting you, you've got a neighbor doing landscaping during your hardest passage, that's your problem. At a testing center, it's a more controlled environment. You're less likely to experience issues. Now, there is also a new LSAT testing interface. LSAC is already rolling that out inside the LSAC Law Hub platform. LSAC keeps calling these minor user interface changes, but in the big picture, they're right, maybe, but minor's carrying some weight in that sense because some of those changes actually matter. A lot of what changed is actually good. There is a new reset response button on each question set, so one click wipes your selections and your eliminations and hands you a clean slate. They also changed up the question bar. Instead of showing only 10 questions the way it used to do in their previous preview, it shows the whole section at once, so they did listen to our feedback. You can now see your full landscape and jump around a lot more easily. For reading comp, that selection bar, the question bar, now marks which question numbers belong to which passage. The timer features are all back in as well. Anything you flag for review shows up right there on the bar as well. They brought that back too. There's more landing this month, including fully functional highlighting and underlining across the passage, the question stems, and the answer choices. They listen to us on that as well. If you mark up the text as you read, and you should be, those tools are not fully in place until that June release, which will still give you at least 4 weeks, maybe more, with the finished version. It's tight, but it's still workable. But there is one change that is not so great, and they've already told us directly they are not going to change that. Bad news, unfortunately. In this new interface, you cannot select and eliminate answers in a single click the way you might be used to. LSAC has said this flat out. Because of how the underlying test driver platform is built, they can't give you what they called radio button functionality. In plain English, that means moving from selecting an answer to eliminating one takes an extra click. And they've said this cannot be changed. They're not going to change it, unfortunately. Now, if you're good at this test, you don't just pick answers. You work by elimination in many cases. On a hard logical reasoning question, your whole process is knocking out the wrong answers one by one until you're down to the credited response or down to a final two that you decide between. Elimination is a big part of how folks take practice questions on a multiple choice exam. Now, logical reasoning is 2/3 of your scored sections, 2/3 of your entire score. Reading comp is one section, the other third. Across the entire exam, you're looking at roughly 75 scored questions, and on the majority of them, probably, you're going to eliminate multiple choices. And if every elimination costs you an extra click compared to what you're used to, those clicks are going to pile up. It's like a tax. And that, of course, is not the entire difference between a 165 and a 175 by itself. I'm not going to oversell it, but this is a test where people will oftentimes miss the last question of a section because they ran out of time by just 20 seconds. So anything that adds friction to your most repeated motion is something that you want to handle in advance, not something you meet for the first time while the clock is running. And so the fix here I'm going to recommend for you is pretty simple. You practice your elimination workflow in the real new interface until that extra click is automatic, until you do it without even thinking. You don't want the first time you feel it to be question 14 of a scored section in an in-person testing center with your future on the line. And the only place you can practice this is the actual interface on the LSAC Law Hub platform. In other words, I'll say this directly with no ambiguity, for your full-length practice tests and for your timed sections, for getting comfortable with the test day environment, I want you to practice in Law Hub directly, the official LSAT platform, the one LSAC actually runs, not some third-party unofficial simulator, not some app that is trying to recreate LSAT questions on the fly. I want you to use the real thing, and this matters more than it ever has before because the interface has changed, and the only place on earth where you can practice in the exact current official interface you'll see on test day is Law Hub. No third-party unofficial platforms, not studying out of a book, not studying out of ChatGPT, for God's sakes. LSAC has already loaded every single official practice test, around 60 of them, into that new interface. They built you a demo. They went out of the way to let you train it in the precise environment you'll actually test in, so take the gift for what it is. Now let's talk about what a third-party simulator actually is. It is some company's recreation of the LSAT screen, and for years, some of them were decent copies of the old interface, but the screen just changed. And so as of August 2026, a third-party simulator is by definition showing you a layout that's out of date the moment LSAC's new one has gone live. And remember that extra click I mentioned? This is exactly where it's going to hurt you. If your third-party platform still has the old smooth one-click select and eliminate, then every practice test you take it on is drilling a habit the real test is not going to let you use. You're building muscle memory for emotion that doesn't exist on your official LSAT. That is the opposite of preparation. Now, LawHub is giving you real, official, previously administered LSAT questions. There are some third-party platforms, not going to name names here, but some of them are running LSAT-style questions, which somebody wrote to look like the real thing, but they are not real LSAT questions. They don't have the precision, they don't have the trap structure, and the specific flavor of wrong answer the real test uses. If you practice on fake questions, you are training yourself to beat fake questions. Then the real one shows up with wrong answers that are subtler and meaner than what you're drilled against. Now, I'm not telling you that every third-party tool is garbage. A good course will teach you the concepts. A good drilling tool will help you grind a specific LSAT question type. A good explanation will get you unstuck when you can't figure out why you got something wrong. Now, coaching, which is what I do, is about strategy and the thinking behind the questions, and that goes on top of the materials, not inside the interface. So I want to draw a hard line here between learning and simulating. Learning the concepts, drilling weak question types, getting explanations, working with a coach, use whatever helps for that. But when it comes to simulating the test, especially full-length exams, you got to do that inside LawHub. A simulation is only worth something if it simulates the actual exam, and only LawHub has the actual interface. And there's no excuse not to do this. LawHub Advantage is only $120 for an entire year of access, and if you qualify for an LSAC fee waiver based on financial need, it's free. So I'm going to recommend, if you spend only $120 on your LSAT prep, spend it on LawHub before anything else. Open the demo, click around everything, find the reset response button, open and close the question bar, flag a question and watch where it shows up. The worst possible time to discover a button exists is midsection on the official LSAT with the clock ticking. Then try out that elimination workflow on purpose, because that's the extra click issue and it earns its own practice. You want to take a set of logical reasoning questions and force yourself to physically eliminate choices as you go. Also get familiar with that question bar I mentioned earlier. And of course, this is all just interface simulation. It's not the content of the test. If you want help analyzing your mistakes, simulating test day better, getting down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link to book that is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet for everybody watching this now and later. You can grab that free cheat sheet. It's a free download PDF at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. It's a free reference on everything, both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. It's a download linked in my bio, linked below the video as well. Happy to take any and all questions on anything at all. LSAT and law school admissions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I will get to as many of those as I can. Just feel free to drop them in here. I see Malik is asking, so median scores of top schools will still be like 171 plus, even though a lot of them could have been cheating? Good question here. So there's no doubt that some of the top scores on the recent LSATs over the past couple of years were due to cheating specifically. Can't say for certain, of course, we're never necessarily going to know. But I don't think the majority of the top scores are necessarily from cheating. We'll see what happens. We'll see if the LSAT score medians drop over time. But I personally don't see LSAT score inflation changing anytime soon. I don't see LSAT score medians dropping. I think that there are a lot of other factors contributing to LSAT score inflation aside from the cheating. Specifically, I'm talking here about the increased retakes on the LSAT and the increased provision of LSAT accommodations. In other words, while some top scorers got their scores due to cheating, I think more of them are getting their scores because of increased LSAT retakes. For those who aren't aware, the LSAT has gone from being offered 4 times a year to 8 times a year, which means that there are more opportunities to retake and more folks are aware of this. And law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record, meaning there's no downside to retaking, so more folks do that. But the bigger factor is that LSAC has significantly increased the number and percentage of those taking the LSAT with extra time. They used to deny a lot of folks extra time who deserved it. Now the pendulum has swung the other way and they're probably giving out too many accommodations. They approve 98% of requests for extra time, meaning if you ask for it, if you have the documentation, you'll probably get what you're asking for. And that is probably a bigger factor in the increase in LSAT scores. One other factor is that with the removal of the logic games section, LSAC may not have anticipated that scores would rise because there's less material for you to study, so you can narrow and deepen your focus on the two remaining scored portions of the LSAT, logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So I think those are the biggest factors contributing to rising medians, and those are not changing anytime soon. I see Tivog is asking about the cheat sheet download PDF. You can grab that at unpluggedprep.com/start /cheat sheet. I put that in the chat again. And then, of course, for the free LSAT tutoring, that's unpluggedprep.com/start. I see Judy's asking, do you think we'll see a steep decline in scores because of in-person testing? I don't think so necessarily. I mean, it might decrease scores a little bit. I think that part of what led to scores increasing previously was that taking the LSAT remotely was a more comfortable environment, which may have contributed to score inflation. So maybe we'll see a little bit of a drop. So two forces that would decrease scores would be the ending or limiting of cheating and the return to in-person testing, but countervailing force would be the rise in accommodations and the increased retakes. And I think that the rise in accommodations will probably outweigh the return to in-person testing. So in other words, medians are not going to go down, I don't think. I think they'll continue to rise, maybe at a slower pace. Good questions here, folks. I see Judy saying she was watching my videos last night. Now I'm in the feed up. I'm just showing up everywhere. Awesome. Or maybe you're just looking into the LSAT a lot, but I'm glad you're finding it helpful. Malik's asking, if you get a score in the 160s, could you possibly go to a good school? Maybe. Other questions would be, what's your undergraduate GPA? Because GPA median matters as well. And then how do you define a good school? And then, of course, is the goal to just get into law school or to get into a good law school with scholarship money and good bar passage rates and good employment outcomes. So I see you have a 3.8 GPA. That's good. If you match that 3.8 GPA with a 165, 169, 170, you'll probably have some pretty solid law school admissions outcomes. But again, we got to define what's a good law school. And do you want good law school at sticker, or do you want good law school with significant scholarships or a full ride? If you want to get in with scholarship money and maybe even a full ride, you don't want to just aim for the medians. You want to aim for ideally the 75th percentile of the law school that you're targeting. Because if you're just at the median, keep in mind the median is last year's metrics, so it's a trailing indicator. Law schools are always looking to raise their medians for the coming year because of competition and because of all the inflation on both GPAs and LSATs. And then additionally, you don't want to just get in, you want to get scholarships, and the medians are rising for the reasons I mentioned. And by the way, just as there's LSAT inflation, there's also GPA inflation as well. Braden's asking, do you think there is still a way for students or organized cheating schemes to cheat, even with the move to in-person testing? I do. I do think that cheating will continue for a couple of reasons. I'm not going to speculate publicly about the ways someone could cheat in person because I don't want to give any ideas to the cheaters. But I'll say this, that for the fact that LSAC is still allowing exceptions for remote testing, I think is a huge problem. Because the remote testing is the vulnerability, right? They admitted that, and that's why they are discontinuing remote testing for almost everybody. The problem is they were discontinuing it for almost everybody and not 100% of all test takers. And so any exceptions remain a vulnerability. It's like they've left open one door and said, we're going to allow this single door open to the bank vault. We're closing the other doors, but if one door is still open, the thieves might just go into that door, right? So same thing here. LSAC said, if you have specific medical accommodations or disabilities that require remote testing, then you can take it remotely. And my thought is they should send somebody to your house if they have to. I mean, to proctor it in person if they need to. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but if remote testing is a vulnerability, they need to take whatever steps they could take to shut it down. And the accommodations thing is one factor, of course, but I think the other issue that's a more obvious one that is a problematic one is if you live remotely. If you live remotely, more than 3 hours or 180 miles from an in-person testing center, they'll just let you take it remotely. And so my thought is, wouldn't the cheater just get some physical address documentation in the middle of nowhere? If they're determined enough to cheat, and if the money is good enough that they're making tens of thousands of dollars or more by cheating, don't you think the cheaters are resourceful enough to find a way to get a documented address in the middle of nowhere? And here's the even funnier thing. It doesn't have to even be the middle of nowhere. I was looking into LSAC trivia because I'm just into that sort of thing, obviously. And I discovered that in the province of Quebec in Canada, there are laws around things having to be in both French and English because they want to preserve the French language. Now, there are a lot of potential interesting implications of that, and for businesses that are providing text on whatever they're selling. For example, that's why a lot of products are in both English and French that are sold in North America, if you're curious about that. Like even toilet paper is in French when you're buying it in the US because they're selling in the Quebec market also. But the LSAT is not offered in French. And so for that reason, because the LSAT is not willing to translate the exam into French to offer it in Quebec, they are not permitted to offer the LSAT in the entire province of Quebec. Meaning that if you are an LSAT test taker in Quebec, you can't take the LSAT in person. And so LSAC could force all test takers in Quebec to go to, say, Toronto or Ottawa to take the LSAT in person, but they don't. They allow them to take it remotely. And so what I think the cheaters could be doing is they could be getting a physical address in the province of Quebec, registering for the LSAT with that address, and then saying, hey, I'm not near a testing center, so let me take it remotely. And so, sorry, folks in Quebec, but I think that LSAC should probably devote a little bit of additional scrutiny to folks taking the LSAT in Quebec as well as anybody taking the LSAT remotely on geographic grounds, because it's easier to fake an address in the middle of nowhere or Quebec than to fake a particular medical accommodations that would require taking the LSAT outside of a testing center. Big issue, open vulnerability that they are permitting. I've been talking about this for weeks and months now, and I haven't seen a change in the policy. So my thought is they just don't want to deal with fighting over this, so they're just going to devote additional scrutiny to those taking it remotely. And so if you do take it remotely, if you're trying to circumvent these in-person requirements, you may be at increased likelihood of getting a score hold because of the concern over cheating. Judy's asking, could I enroll to take the LSAT in Canada even though I live in New York? No, unfortunately not. They're going by your address that's documented. And so you can't just make up a Canadian address. You've got to actually have that documented, probably on some official government paperwork of some kind, and be able to provide like a utility bill or a government ID showing your address. And probably pretty hard to do that across country lines, let alone state lines. And so if you're in New York, you're taking it in New York, probably in person. I see Leonardo saying that he's happy that his tutor in our company, Chase, is very good. Awesome. Glad that, yeah, Leonardo's a student in the program. Glad the tutoring is going well. Aria is asking, how much does the LSAT score matter compared to the GPA? Asking since I graduated from undergrad about 10 years ago, but my degree was in electrical engineering, and so my GPA was in the B- C+ range. So good news is your LSAT score weighs more heavily than your undergraduate GPA for law school admissions purposes. You can offset a lower GPA with a higher LSAT score. That's good news. And the B- C+ GPA, of course, is not a great GPA. Law schools will, of course, have the context of your degree being in electrical engineering as opposed to a major that is more benefited by grade inflation. At the same time, though, the numbers are the numbers. So it's good context, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to get a higher LSAT score to compensate. Jack asks, thoughts on the Knicks winning last night? I saw some pretty impressive clips online about it, so I'm happy to see that. And as a native New Yorker, I'm happy to see that as well. Malik's asking, don't you need multiple camera angles for the LSAT online? How can you cheat? Not going to get into particulars on that, but think about it this way, that anything that is on the computer can be hacked. Literally anything on the computer can be hacked in some ways, and it's kind of an arms race, essentially. Jessica's saying, but you're talking about 1% of test takers. These students will not pass law school. There's a reason for the LSAT. Good point, right? I mean, if you cheat on the LSAT to get into law school, and then you have a hard time in law school and you just have to keep cheating, and maybe that's what they're going to do. So not an ideal way to go through life, both on moral and practical grounds, I would say. Sharkboy's asking, what law schools are reputable for transactional mergers and acquisitions that are easier in admissions? Tough one. My understanding is that transactional M&A is more of a big law category. I'm not super practiced in that since I don't practice law, but my understanding would be that work at that level is big law type work, and big law is not one of the easier areas of law to get into. And so you're going to want to go to a top law school to get into big law to do that kind of work. And so I think by definition, the best paying areas of law also require going to the most elite law schools, all else being equal. Of course, there are exceptions, but if you want to work in an elite area of law, you want to go to an elite law school as well, which is going to, by definition, be more selective, harder to get into. And so if you want to practice that kind of law, you're going to want to get stronger numbers to get into better law schools. Eric's asking, finishing up a psych degree with a 3.8 GPA spread across 5 years, is this looked down upon? 3.8 GPA is a pretty good GPA. The fact that it's spread across 5 years is not a big deal. I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. At this point, if your GPA is a done deal, which it sounds like it is, time to switch focus to the LSAT. That's going to be the biggest needle mover that you have available to you at this stage. And the 3.8 GPA is at or above a lot of law school medians. It's below the T14 and maybe the T20 as well, but you can offset that with a higher LSAT. Camden is asking, what is your top reading comp advice? It's my weakness. Okay, Camden, I mean, how are you currently approaching reading comp? If you can share a bit more about what you're currently doing, I can give you advice on what I might change. I find that most students spend way too long on reading comp, highlighting, underlining, note-taking. And so I would try to minimize that sort of thing. It takes time to write things down, takes time to read things, and what you end up writing down, what you end up noting ends up not even being that useful to you. And so you can save time both on your initial read of the passage as well as going back to it if you just stop doing a lot of that. In other words, do less. I see Camden saying, I have a fear of missing details, so I end up reading everything very carefully, and I'm missing the bigger points and views. Okay, so let's change the approach. If your current approach is not working, let's try just doing the opposite and seeing what happens. And so what if you stopped worrying about the details and you instead focused only on the big picture? In other words, you read the passage with only one single thing in mind. What's the author's opinion? What's the main idea? What's the author's primary purpose? If you could walk away with just that, that alone can help you knock out the general global questions associated with the passage, like main point, primary purpose, passage organization, title, tone, author's opinion. You could knock all of those out just knowing the main idea. The details, the supporting examples, you can always go back and find them when you need to. So when you're reading the passage, you want to know where those things appear, where that type of evidence appears, the list of examples, for example. Find where those are, but don't get bogged down in trying to understand them inside out during the initial read. Just note where they appear, for example, middle of paragraph 2 or the end of paragraph 3. Then you go back when you need to solve specific questions. As Judy's saying, I do have some videos on the YouTube channel covering this, for example, how to study for the LSAT in 30 days. I have plenty of reading comp videos as well. The YouTube channel is linked in my bio on TikTok and Instagram if you want to check it out there. I have a playlist as well on the YouTube channel titled something like Free LSAT Course, where I've listed a lot of my best YouTube videos. Just scanning through for more questions. Feel free to keep them coming. I see Malik is asking, better to go to Wayne State or MSU for free versus Michigan for full price. That's the ultimate dilemma, right? Do you want to go to a lower ranked law school with more scholarship money or a higher ranked school with less or no scholarship money? And there's no obvious easy answer to that. There's no number one obvious solution. There's more just trade-offs between taking on more debt for a lower ranked school and possibly less prestigious employment outcomes versus a higher ranked school where you take on more debt up front, but then you're having increased earning power based on the prestige of the school. And so It depends on your appetite and your willingness to take on debt, as well as what kind of degrees you want to pursue. If you want to work in big law, in many cases, you want to go to the more prestigious school, even if you get less scholarship money, because the bigger firms are recruiting out of the top law schools, and that's where that's the pipeline to get into those kinds of jobs. But if you don't want big law, then maybe going to the lower ranked, more regional school is the better move. I see someone in the chat saying, I got a full ride to a school ranked in the 50s, turned down offers to top 20 schools, 100% recommended. Cool. I mean, out of curiosity, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of job did you end up taking on? What kind of work did you want to do with your degree? So I see the answer saying workers' comp and personal injury at a mid-sized firm. Okay, so mid-sized firm, workers' comp and personal injury, not big law work, but not everyone needs that. Yeah, I see they're saying no desire for big law, LOL. See, Mac is asking, what is the importance of extracurriculars when applying? Not a whole lot, to be frank. I mean, law school admissions is unlike undergrad admissions in that it's more numbers driven, numbers focused. It's your LSAT score number one, your GPA number two, everything else being a distant third. And that would include application essays like your personal statement. That would include your resume. That would include rec letters. That would include interviews. All of that being a distant third after the numbers. Number one being your LSAT, number two being your GPA. So you don't need to be involved in clubs or have leadership positions. It's not like undergrad admissions. If you have it, of course, great, definitely include it. Talk about it if you have it, but I'd rather you have a few more points on your LSAT than focus more on the softs. I see Big Burdav's asking, is 1 hour a day sufficient for studying if I'm in a paralegal program for 2 years? Are you saying that you're going to study for the LSAT for 2 years? If so, 1 hour a day is fine. I would look at, when are you planning on taking the LSAT? How much time do you have between now and then? What's your goal score? Where are you currently scoring? What kind of support are you getting? Okay, so you want to take it in 6 months? 1 hour a day could be okay for now, but I'd want you to increase it as the exam gets closer, ideally. And you're at a 160 diagnostic as of 1 week ago. Okay, cool. So that's a pretty good starting point, higher than my starting diagnostic. I'd be curious to know what your goal is. And then I'd be curious, can you increase it as test day gets closer? Can you increase it from 1 hour a day to 2 hours a day, or maybe do a bit more time on the weekends? And of course, the type of studying that you do will make a difference as well. In other words, at a certain point, you may want to get some personal support rather than just self-studying. Not saying you have to, of course, but the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. But once we add some personalized support into the mix, there's usually a pretty quick score boost, meaning there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so if you want to talk through what your personalized study plan could look like to help you get from your starting point up to your goal score on your time frame, you could book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. The link to book that free lesson is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. It's a quick reference on everything logical reasoning and reading comprehension. You can download that as a free PDF at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. That same link is also below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. For those just joining, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching this. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So I do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing this to your socials, any group chats you're part of, any pre-law societies you're part of, any Facebook groups or Discords or subreddits. The more this grows, the more I will expand these over time. I see someone asking, are the LSAT prep test scores a good indicator of your score on the actual test? They very well could be. I mean, the idea being that you take practice tests to get a reasonable indication, an accurate read on where you stand, but you want to take them under realistic test day conditions, properly simulating what test day itself is going to be like. And so you're going to want to use the LSAC Law Hub platform. That is the only software that adequately reflects what test day will actually look like, the functionality, the software. I mentioned earlier a lot of the user interface changes coming up starting in August. You want to get familiar with those. And taking your practice tests in books or in ChatGPT or online unofficial third-party platforms that don't have the same look and feel. That's not going to give you the accurate read, and that's part of what contributes to test day score drops. So the best way you want to do them is through the LSAC Law Hub platform. I see Deb is asking, any thoughts on taking night classes for law school? So in other words, going to law school in the evening, is this like a part-time program? And so I think that's totally fine. Ultimately, you're earning your degree the same as anybody else, just in a different way. But at the end of the day, you still earn that JD, even if it takes you 4 years instead of 3, and the benefit being you can work simultaneously. Keep in mind, though, is that it's not easy to work while you're in law school, even if you're going to law school part-time. So make sure that you're getting buy-in and support from your family, significant other, because that will play a role in your succeeding in law school. It's not easy under any circumstances, let alone while you're working, if you are going to be working during that time. Thanks for joining, folks. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, all the best. Take care.